This is Duke University.
But what's important here is that with Whitman, the poet-narrator's I becomes a sort of functional proxy or a mediator between the reader and the poetic being all readers, all people. So Whitman is an important relator between the common voice and the people that make up the common voice. And so it's a very interesting relationship. And of course, later on, I talked about the shift to a more individualistic poetics. And of course, I have a photograph of Robert Lowell, who you can almost feel the very poet by looking at his face. And in this case, here we have the poet in confessing becomes not a proxy for the multitude, but more authentically you than you are. They are more in touch with their singular expression, and when they write to quote you, you are forced to conform to their shape of the you, and you are in essence programmed into a sense of their you. And I find editorially that it's somewhat either boring, creepy, egomaniacal, or perhaps all of the above. And I'll quote a poet that many people like, and I've certainly enjoyed in the past, a poem by Charles Bukowski called Confession. I want to let her know that through that all the night sleeping beside her, even the useless arguments were things ever splendid, and the hard words I ever feared to say can now be said. I love you. The experience of that I love you in that text is that we're somehow understood to make the transition from this particular you case, and that we are experiencing that you along with, or we're rather put into that role by the narrator. And so this is a very strange sense of the self in terms of poetic tradition. But I also want to talk about some of even the rebellion against confessionalism and poet-centric poetics, namely language poetry, which has become more and more influential, particularly in the academy as of late. And so, language, many of its goals is to get beyond confessionalism, but instead of focusing on the author's right to freely express himself, as with confessionalist poets, one could make a pretty strong argument that language poets focused on the right of the artist to freely choose the form of expression. And just a quick quote that might exemplify that is one of the founding language poets, Bruce Andrews, writes, "I want something that holds together that's not smooth." And of course, this espouses his desire for the disjoint narrative or the broken narrative. So importantly, it's still about the author, about the author's desires, the author's fixations, and the author's relation to a text that is not ambiguous, even if the text is revealed to be material. So I'll talk about some of the problems with a poet-centric poetics. And so the dimensions here that I want to cover is the idea of the skepticism of the self, the idea that identity is a form of property, which is, I think, highly debatable in both directions, that there are only many I's in this model, not a we, and that the author, the notion of the authentic author is somewhat dubious, and what that means and how the literary forgery functions in a world like that. So back to the skepticism of the self, the linear individual pursuit of Cartesian doubt that is in the cogito and discourse of meditations with Descartes is something that I think Hume pushes to the brink by asking, what is this I that Descartes finds in the middle? I don't even see an I. I just see these thoughts. And even the sense of succession is something which I have a difficult time understanding. So we do have a modern tradition of skepticism of what this self is, what this inner or private voice is. And also, moving to identity as property, if you pick up a poetry journal these days, what you're likely to see on a cover of a poetry journal is probably not even a picture, a title, and a list of names of authors. And somehow through that gestural content, we are to understand the contents of the poetry journal just by a list of poet names. And I find that to be really odd, because how is the name Louise Gluck supposed to tell us what she's written? And somehow yet it does. And I think that's a very powerful message. Certainly it was for me when writing this book. Also, what is the role of this concept of many eyes? Or maybe this is a lament, whereas Whitman's collective voice gone. And if that returned, why would we need to make somebody like Whitman the proxy? Why do we need to look through Whitman, and can't we sort of regenerate or reconstruct a sort of Delphic window where the interlocutor is not so important, but the connection between reader and message is most important.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.